Nightmare behind the wheel. The Uber driver from hell. Once upon a chilling night, a heavy fog blanketed the streets of a quiet, dimly lit town. Sarah, a young woman, found herself needing a ride home after a late-night movie. She summoned an Uber, and within minutes, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver, Mr. Jenkins, had an eerie presence about him. His eyes were obscured by the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat, and his voice was as cold as the night itself. Sarah hesitated, but feeling a bit foolish, she got into the car. As they navigated the fog-shrouded streets, Sarah couldn't shake a growing unease. The car's interior seemed unnaturally cold, despite the heating system being on full blast. Glancing at the rearview mirror, she noticed that Mr. Jenkins never once turned to look at her. His eyes remained hidden in darkness. Sarah's heart pounded louder with each passing minute. She decided to strike up a conversation to break the silence. "How long have you been an Uber driver?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Mr. Jenkins' response sent shivers down her spine. "I've been driving these streets for longer than you can imagine, my dear." As the car approached a desolate, overgrown road that Sarah didn't recognize, her fear escalated. She quickly pulled out her phone to check the GPS, but to her horror, the app displayed a glitched map showing a location deep within a dense forest. Panic surged through her as she realized they were far from the familiar city streets. "Where are we going?" she demanded, her voice quaking with fear. Mr. Jenkins finally turned his head slightly, just enough for Sarah to glimpse the ghastly pallor of his face beneath the brim of his hat. "Somewhere you won't be found," he hissed. Sarah's heart raced as she desperately fumbled for the door handle. To her relief, it finally gave way, and she tumbled out of the car, stumbling into the forest. She heard Mr. Jenkins' chilling laughter echo through the trees as she ran. As Sarah fled deeper into the forest, the fog thickened around her, swallowing her every step. The moon, a feeble presence in the night sky, barely pierced the darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, and fear gripped her like a vice. She stumbled upon an eerie clearing, its ground carpeted with fallen leaves. In the middle of this desolate space stood a decrepit, rusted van, its rear doors ominously ajar. Curiosity mingled with terror, and Sarah approached cautiously. Inside the van, she found herself engulfed by an overwhelming stench of decay. Her flashlight revealed a gruesome scene that will forever haunt her nightmares. Bloodstains marred the van's interior, and a collection of eerie, crude symbols adorned the walls, drawn in what seemed to be dried blood. Before she could react, a sinister whisper enveloped her, as if the very forest itself had come alive. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed, chilling her to the bone. Sarah turned around, only to find Mr. Jenkins standing at the edge of the clearing, his dark silhouette casting an ominous shadow. In his hands, he held a wickedly sharp knife, its blade glistening with fresh blood. Terror froze her in place as he advanced toward her, each step deliberate and menacing. "You can't escape," he sneered, his voice a macabre symphony of madness. Summoning every ounce of courage, Sarah bolted through the forest once more. The eerie whispers of the trees seemed to echo Mr. Jenkins' sinister laughter, intensifying her dread. She ran, branches clawing at her, thorns tearing her clothes, until exhaustion overtook her. Eventually, she stumbled upon a remote cabin. With the last of her strength, she broke in and barricaded the door behind her. Inside, she found a phone and dialed 911. Tears streamed down her face as she relayed her harrowing ordeal to the operator. The police arrived, sirens wailing, and a search party scoured the forest. But when they reached the clearing, the van and Mr. Jenkins were gone, leaving only the chilling symbols on the walls as a gruesome testament to the horror Sarah had endured. Years later, the van, bloodstains, and the malevolent legend of Mr. Jenkins became the stuff of local legend, a reminder that some horrors lurk just beyond the fog, waiting to drag unsuspecting souls into their nightmarish grasp. Sarah, though rescued from the forest, would forever bear the scars of that horrific encounter, and the blood-stained van would forever be etched in her memory as a symbol of unspeakable horror. Story 2. The wrong Uber driver. One night, I ordered an Uber to take me home from a late-night party. The driver arrived quickly, and I hopped into the backseat, ready to get some much-needed rest. Little did I know that I had just stepped into a nightmare. The driver seemed normal at first, but as we started driving, I noticed something was off. The streets we were taking were unfamiliar, and my phone's GPS indicated that we were heading in the wrong direction. I asked the driver where we were going, but he didn't respond. Instead, he drove faster, his knuckles white as he clenched the steering wheel. Panic set in as I realized I was in the car with a stranger who had no intention of taking me home. I fumbled for my phone, trying to call for help, but the driver had disabled my ability to make calls. I pleaded with him to stop the car, my heart racing as we continued to speed through the empty streets. Finally, I saw an opportunity to escape. We approached a red light, and I flung open the door, rolling out of the moving car. I hit the pavement hard, but adrenaline fueled my escape as I scrambled to my feet and ran for help. The driver sped away, and I was left shaken and bruised but alive. It was a terrifying encounter that served as a harsh reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind the anonymity of an Uber ride. Story 3. Never-ending Uber ride. One evening, I ordered an Uber to take me to a friend's house. The driver, a quiet man with a grizzled beard, arrived promptly, and I hopped into the backseat, expecting a routine trip. Little did I know that this ride would become a descent into madness. As we drove, I noticed that the surroundings seemed strangely familiar, as if we were passing the same landmarks over and over again. I checked my phone's GPS, which indicated that we were on the correct route, but something was undeniably wrong. Minutes turned into hours, and the city streets blurred into a disorienting haze. I asked the driver what was going on, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I felt a growing sense of dread as I realized that we were trapped in an endless loop, a never-ending Uber ride that defied all logic. Panic set in, and I pleaded with the driver to let me out, but he continued to drive in eerie silence. Hours turned into days, and I lost all track of time. My pleas for help went unanswered, and I could feel my sanity slipping away. The world outside the car became a nightmarish landscape, an eternal twilight zone. Finally, in a moment of desperation, I managed to unlock the car door and fling myself out onto the deserted street. I tumbled onto the pavement, my body bruised and battered, but I was free from the never-ending Uber ride. I watched as the car drove away, disappearing into the distance. It was a surreal and terrifying experience that left me questioning the boundaries of reality and the true nature of the driver who had taken me on that night. Story 4. The Midnight Ride. It was a moonless night when I hired an Uber for a ride home. The car pulled up, and I climbed into the back seat, greeted by the soft glow of the driver's phone and a polite smile in the rearview mirror. Little did I know this ride would haunt me forever. We started down the quiet, dimly lit streets, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. As we approached an isolated stretch of road, the driver's demeanor shifted. His smile faded, and his eyes grew dark, filled with an unsettling intensity. He turned onto a desolate, overgrown path, far from the main road. Panic welled up inside me, but before I could react, the driver spoke in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You're not going home tonight." I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but it slipped through my trembling fingers. The driver's laughter filled the car, chilling me to the bone. Suddenly, the car came to a screeching halt. I looked out the window and saw a dimly lit figure standing in the road ahead. It was a woman in a tattered dress, her hair hanging in front of her face like a curtain of darkness. The driver's voice trembled as he muttered, "She's here for you." Terrified, I flung open the door and ran into the darkness, the woman's haunting laughter echoing in my ears. I stumbled through the woods, branches clawing at my skin, and finally found my way back to civilization. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something far more sinister than a simple Uber ride. The memory of that night and the haunted driver who took me on that midnight fare still sends chills down my spine. The Midnight Passenger. It was a stormy night when I accepted the last Uber ride of my shift. The destination was a remote, desolate stretch of road surrounded by thick woods, an eerie place even in broad daylight. As I approached, I noticed a figure standing alone in the darkness. I pulled over, and the passenger, a young woman with a pale face and disheveled hair, climbed into the backseat without a word. She seemed distraught, her eyes darting around nervously. I tried to engage in small talk, but she remained silent. The atmosphere inside the car grew tense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. The woman's reflection was distorted, her features contorted into a grotesque mask of rage. I could feel her icy breath on my neck as she whispered, "Drive." Terrified, I accelerated, the rain pounding on the roof like a sinister drumbeat. She directed me deeper into the woods, far from any semblance of civilization. Panic gnawed at me as I realized I was trapped in a nightmare. Suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream that chilled me to the bone. I swerved the car to a stop, and she disappeared, leaving nothing but the echo of her haunting wail. I sped back to the main road, my heart pounding. I would never forget the fear in her eyes or the inexplicable terror that had enveloped that ride. It was a nightmarish journey into the unknown, a tale I could never explain, and one that would haunt my dreams forever. Subscribe for more such scary stories. Thank you for watching.